Hi there! Welcome to our Bible Webcast YouTube channel once again. And if this is your first time, and we again would like to cordially invite you to subscribe in our channel and click on the bell icon so you can get notifications when we have new uploads. So this is part 2 of our 2-part series entitled Divine Creator. Let's get started. Now, as we learned, just to recap from our part 1, as we learned from our study lesson, we established that God is the divine creator of all things, including you and me. Okay? He created all of us. Now, in this part 2, we will learn that God, being the creator of all things, He has the power over all His creation. In other words, all creation will never overpower or exceed the power and understanding of its creator, our God. God as the creator can set the law of nature, the law of the universe, and how all things must work together in harmony. At school, we learned in science that there are various cycles like the life cycles, the water cycle, and so on. We all have been to a beach or along the shoreline. Do you know that the Bible mentioned the sands around all that massive waters in the ocean or in the sea? Let's take a look at Jeremiah 5:22. See what the Bible says. According to Jeremiah 5:22, it says, "Should you not fear me, declares the Lord? Should you not tremble in my presence? I made the sand a boundary for the sea, an everlasting barrier it cannot cross. The waves may roll, but they cannot prevail." Wow. In other words, God is saying, what can I not do? It's like, understand this reality, people, that God doesn't have limitations. Now, because God created the sea, God can contain that massive waters of the sea and that enormous mass of waters and prevent it from overflowing the earth. And think about this. Instead of God using massive mountains or rocks in all edges of the sea as a barrier to contain that massive sea water, God simply used sands to contain it. Remarkable. And if we think more about it, there is no particle of which the sand is in cohesion with another. In other words, there is nothing that sticks the sands together. Because sands are tiny, it's loose, and there's nothing that holds it together. That sands are made up of particles that are easily shifting. And I don't know if you've tried grabbing sands when you were at the beach. So what happens when you grab a sand and starts losing your grip even slightly? Well, as expected, the sands start falling off our hands. And we all have gone to the beach, perhaps a couple of times before. And yet, we saw sand as just plain sand, right? But as we learn more about the creator of the sand, and as Christians, we now have, or should have, a different perspective when we see a sand. Because as we recognize the creator of the sand, God, it behooves us to have a deeper appreciation, deeper understanding why it's there, its purpose, and the power behind the creation of the sand. It changes the way we see sands and all other of God's creation. We now see as the sands as the boundaries God has set for the sea. God tells the ocean where to stop. That God has power on all his creation. God can pretty much dictate how it should behave. Okay? Now this is a picture of our earth. And we notice that our earth is a sphere in shape. And the bodies of water all around it is way or much bigger than the land mass or soil. And yet, that massive water, that massive area of water is so bound and restrained by the sand. There's a clear boundary, and it does not overflow the entire earth. And it's just sand that's holding the water, that massive water, in its place through the power and providence of God, its creator. So although the sand are so tiny and flexible and movable, or it can easily shift, it can bound or hold water in place and remain firm and stable by God's decree. And by God's decree, it will remain that way forever, and not just for a period of time. That even the most tremendous waves cannot displace nor pass over this simple barrier. Even after a huge tsunami, the water will still end up receding or returning back to where it belongs, because that's God's decree to the sea. And though the waves toss themselves, it cannot prevail. And though they roar, it cannot pass over it unless God, its creator, allows it. So you see, it certainly showcases the mighty power of God. And it carries in it an argument and reason why he should be feared. Or another way of saying it is, it poses a reason why we should fear God and tremble in his presence. Though the sea and its waves are destitute of sense and reason, meaning it cannot think. The seas and waves cannot think. They don't have the ability to reason. However, it knows how to obey its maker or its creator. In other words, just like any inanimate objects, it doesn't have the ability to even think. But it obeys. It knows how to obey its creator. And yet, some human beings who were created specially in God's image, who are given the ability to think and have the reasoning, ability, could not recognize the power of God and could show complete obedience. That's sad. Which is why God, in this verse, God asked the question, should you not fear me? Should you not tremble in my presence? Notice the next statement after his question. God made a declaration of his power. And whenever there's a declaration statement that qualifies the preceding question, it overturns the preceding question and makes the question become a declaration statement instead. For example, if your boss says, well, Janette, should you not be following my orders? I'm your boss, So what my boss is actually saying is that, well, I'm your boss, and you should be following my orders. See how the question is meant to be a declaration rather than an innocent question. So in essence, God's implication in his question in this verse was that we should fear the Lord. It is indeed a huge foolishness not to fear God, since even inanimate objects or elements obey its creator. The seawater, as liquid as it is restrained by the power of God. That the sea is confined to its own place because of God's appointment. According to Genesis chapter 1 verse 9 says, "And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. See, let the dry land appear. Why? Because at first the earth was covered with water, and no part of it appeared until God formed the sea. And because God said the water be gathered in one place and let the dry ground appear, the sea recognizes its perpetual or everlasting eternal ordinance from God, which is to stay gathered in one place. And there's only one instance recorded in the Bible that the water covered the entire earth after creation. And that is because God allowed it to happen. And you all probably heard about the great flood in Noah's days. So quickly, let's take a look at that. In Genesis chapter 7 verse 12, let's start off with that. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them, meaning the people, and the earth, or everything that's in it. See, only God can change the course of nature. And there are numerous archaeological and scientific findings which conclude that this great flood truly happened. God at his own discretion can tell the waters to rise. Let's continue reading. On verse 23, every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. Verse 24 says, the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Quite a long time, 150 days. That's 5 months. Now on verse 8, let's jump to verse 8. It says the water, after having rained for that long period of time, chapter 8, verse 3 says, the water receded steadily from the earth. And verse 11 says, the Lord said to Noah, I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. See, God is establishing a covenant here at this verse. Verse 12 says, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you. A covenant for all generations to come. And you know what that sign is? What the sign of the covenant that God is referring to here? Because it says here, this is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature. Let's look at verse 13. It says, I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And when it rains, we see rainbow across the sky. Okay, verse 14 says that whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the cloud. Verse 15 says, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. So I will be creating a separate video about the Great Flood, and we will dive deeper and answer some questions like, how was the flood in the time of Noah just? Why is it fair? Why did God destroy the world and all its inhabitants and only save Noah and his family? Questions like, why did God send the flood when he knew sin would continue after the flood? And isn't sin just as bad after the flood as it was before the flood? Was Noah's flood global or local? Did the flood in Noah's time really cover the entire earth? What was the purpose of that flood in the time of Noah? Okay, so keep an eye on it. Watch for our video upload for that. But for now, for the purpose of our series, part 2 of our series, The Divine Creator, we are using this Bible documentation of this flood as just an example that God, as the creator of all things, he has sole authority and divine power over his creations. Okay. So, again, let's go back to Jeremiah 5:22, where God asked a question, which is rather rhetorical. When we read in the book of James, we will get another insight as to that line of questioning. So James chapter 2, verse 19 says, "Thou believe that there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble." Let me repeat that. The devils, according to this verse, the devils also believe and tremble. And why do you think the devils also believe and tremble? It's not because they love God. It's because they know how powerful God is. Their fear, the devil's fear, is a recognition of God's infinite power. If the devils believe and tremble, as human beings, do we have an excuse to fear God? Not to fear God? And that's why it's sad that some people do not fear God. Why? Well, people who do not fear God are comparatively worse than the devils who believe in God's power. But I'd like to make that distinction that believing is one thing, obedience is completely a different thing. The devils just believe, and they're afraid of the power of God, but they don't obey. Okay? So what does it mean to fear the Lord? I'll let the Bible answer that question. In Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." So fear means submission, giving reverence to God. Fear me is a sign of humility, obedience, passion to get to know God deeper. And fear is that desire to give worship that is due to an all-powerful knowing God. The fear of the Lord also gives us the right perspective. According to Psalms 19 verse 1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." And that's why we don't have any excuse, folks. There's enormous evidences that there is a divine creator. Okay? And that concludes our part 2. And we will start a new series entitled The Book of Truth, so keep an eye on that. Again, if this is your first time in our YouTube channel, please subscribe, click the bell icon so that you can get notifications of our next video upload. Let's learn the Bible together, and to God be the glory. Thank you for watching.